When former President Donald Trump returned to the political spotlight with the unveiling of what he dubbed his Big Beautiful Bill, the nation took notice. With sweeping proposals to reshape America's tax code, social safety net, healthcare system, and financial regulation, this legislation sent shockwaves through Washington and Wall Street alike. Critics called it overreaching and risky. Supporters hailed it as a bold return to American greatness. But beyond the political posturing and headlines, this bill, whether hypothetical or real in the future, has the potential to dramatically alter the everyday lives of Americans. From how much you take home in your paycheck, to the price of groceries and medicine, to the way markets respond and retirees plan their futures, Trump's Big Beautiful Bill could have seismic consequences across the board. Let's begin with what the bill proposes. Central to the plan is a sweeping set of tax cuts, primarily aimed at corporations and high-income earners. Trump, echoing the rationale behind the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, argues that lowering the corporate tax rate will unleash a new wave of investment, job creation, and wage growth. He envisions a simplified tax code with fewer brackets, expanded deductions for families, and incentives for businesses to bring operations and profits back to American soil. These provisions are accompanied by a rollback of certain capital gains taxes and estate taxes, a favorite move among the wealthy donor class. But what does this mean for the average person? In the short term, many Americans would see slightly larger paychecks thanks to marginal tax relief and adjustments to standard deductions. However, those benefits would be uneven. Lower-income households would see modest gains, while the top 10% of earners would receive the lion's share of savings. The bill assumes that trickle-down economics will do the rest. Higher profits will fuel investment, create new jobs, and eventually raise wages across the board. Critics argue that this rarely materializes as promised, and that corporations are more likely to use extra cash for stock buybacks than worker raises. At the same time, the bill's tax cuts could lead to significant increases in the national deficit. The Trump administration famously downplayed the effects of tax cuts on the deficit during his first term, asserting that economic growth would offset lost revenue. But nonpartisan analysts, including the Congressional Budget Office, warned that the 2017 cuts ballooned the federal debt. The Big Beautiful Bill could further deepen this debt unless it is paired with aggressive spending cuts, something Trump nods to but doesn't fully outline in his proposal. Enter inflation. One of the most immediate concerns with large-scale tax reductions, especially in a high-debt environment, is the potential for inflationary pressure. Pumping more disposable income into the economy, especially for those likely to spend on luxury goods or equities, can drive demand beyond supply. In a post-pandemic economy already struggling with supply chain disruptions, labor shortages, and rising costs, this new influx of capital could accelerate price increases. Economists would closely watch the consumer price index, especially in sectors like housing, energy, and food. If inflation spikes, the Federal Reserve may be forced to raise interest rates more aggressively, which could slow the economy or even tip it into recession. The bill also addresses regulatory reform and seeks to weaken federal oversight in several sectors, including financial services, energy, and technology. Trump's vision is rooted in deregulation, eliminating what he views as bureaucratic red tape that hampers business innovation and growth. His bill would relax Dodd-Frank provisions, ease restrictions on environmental compliance, and reduce the influence of federal agencies on business decision-making. Supporters argue this creates a more business-friendly environment. Detractors fear it risks another financial crisis, environmental degradation, and corporate overreach. Wall Street, at least initially, would cheer much of this bill. Corporate tax cuts and deregulation are catnip to investors. Stock prices could soar in anticipation of higher profits and less government interference. Sectors like banking, energy, and construction could see significant gains. Market optimism might buoy retirement portfolios, boost consumer confidence, and stimulate investment. However, seasoned investors would also watch the bond market carefully. A swelling deficit and inflation risk could erode confidence in long-term U.S. fiscal stability, pushing up yields and possibly triggering a flight from treasuries. Now, let's turn to healthcare, specifically Medicare. Trump's bill proposes partial privatization of Medicare under a so-called freedom of choice plan. It would allow seniors to opt out of traditional Medicare and into privately managed plans, some of which could be health savings accounts tied to high-deductible policies. Advocates say this injects competition into the system, lowers costs, and gives consumers more options. But critics warn that it fragments coverage, drives up out-of-pocket expenses, and leaves the most vulnerable without adequate care. Under this plan, wealthier seniors who can afford supplemental coverage may fare well, while those on fixed incomes may struggle to afford premiums, deductibles, or prescription drugs. Medicaid, the healthcare program for low-income Americans, would also face sweeping reforms under the bill. Trump's plan caps federal funding through block grants to states, arguing this gives states more flexibility to tailor programs. But in practice, such caps often lead to cuts in coverage, benefits, or enrollment. States facing budget shortfalls might reduce eligibility or services. Millions could lose access to critical health care, particularly in rural or underserved areas. Education is another area the bill seeks to disrupt. Trump's proposal includes expanded school voucher programs and a significant reduction in federal education funding, under the belief that states and local governments should manage education independently. Charter schools, private institutions, and religious academies would benefit. Public school advocates warn this could widen the gap between rich and poor districts, leaving low-income students in underfunded, struggling schools. Long-term economic growth depends on a well-educated workforce, so these cuts could have ripple effects for decades. Trump's bill also touches on immigration, proposing tighter border controls and work visa reforms. These measures are framed as job protection for American citizens, but they also risk labor shortages in critical industries like agriculture, healthcare, and construction. The economic implications are complex. Reducing low-wage labor may push up wages in some sectors, but it could also lead to price hikes for consumers and lower overall productivity. Additionally, immigrant communities contribute significantly to tax bases and innovation. A more restrictive policy could hurt competitiveness and cultural diversity. Social welfare programs face a similar fate under the bill. Food assistance, housing subsidies, and unemployment benefits would be restructured to incentivize work, echoing welfare reform efforts from the 1990s. While this might reduce dependency in theory, the reality is more complicated. Many recipients already work, often in low-wage, unstable jobs. Stricter eligibility and lower benefits could increase poverty and hardship, particularly during economic downturns. The human cost of such cuts is difficult to quantify, but undeniably real. As for infrastructure, Trump's bill proposes massive investments in highways, bridges, and energy projects, but largely through private partnerships. Instead of direct federal spending, the plan relies on tax incentives and loans to encourage private investment. This could fast-track certain projects but leaves rural areas, which offer less profit potential, at a disadvantage. Moreover, public oversight and long-term accountability may be sacrificed in favor of speed and cost-cutting. In the digital realm, Trump's bill includes provisions to protect free speech online, which critics say could weaken content moderation and amplify misinformation. It aims to limit the liability of platforms that restrict user content and push back against what Trump and his allies call big tech censorship. These changes could embolden extremist voices, complicate content regulation, and alter the nature of digital discourse. Finally, the bill proposes a national sales tax, or value-added tax, to help offset revenue losses from the income tax cuts. This kind of tax is regressive, meaning it disproportionately affects lower-income individuals who spend a larger portion of their income on necessities. While it simplifies taxation in some ways and ensures everyone pays, it could also deepen inequality and place a greater burden on working families. So, who wins and who loses under Trump's big, beautiful bill? The winners include high-income individuals, large corporations, private healthcare providers, charter schools, and financial markets. The bill rewards those who already hold capital and are positioned to take advantage of deregulation and tax advantages. It caters to a vision of America rooted in individualism, capitalism, and limited government. The losers? Low and middle-income families who depend on public services, retirees reliant on Medicare, students in public schools, and small businesses that benefit from government-backed programs. The bill risks increasing inequality, undermining public institutions, and pushing vulnerable populations into deeper hardship. Politically, this bill represents a dramatic shift. It's not just a return to Trump-era policies, it's an escalation. It's a redefinition of federal responsibility, a declaration of war on the administrative state, and a consolidation of economic power. Supporters see it as the key to American resurgence. Opponents fear it's a recipe for division, instability, and decline. In the end, Trump's big, beautiful bill is more than legislation. It's a blueprint for an America remade. It forces a national conversation about the role of government, the value of equality, and the price of freedom. Whether it passes or not, its impact is already being felt in campaign rallies, legislative agendas, and dinner table debates. As the bill moves through Congress, one thing is clear. The future of America may be shaped not just by the votes of legislators, but by the voices of its people. How they react, organize, and mobilize will determine whether Trump's vision becomes a lasting legacy or a passing headline.